Welcome, listeners, to a brand new deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating and often pretty controversial book, one that's really captivated millions, but, also stirred up significant debate. We're talking about Robert Greene's bestseller, The 48 Laws of Power.
Mhm.
Probably heard of it. Its influence, well, it stretches everywhere. Corporate boardrooms, celebrity circles. It's one of those books people seem to either swear by or, passionately argue against.
It's definitely got that reputation.
Yeah.
Published back in 1998. And the 48 Laws of Power is, well, essentially a self-help guide, but with a very specific angle. It distills these 48 principles designed to help you gain and, importantly, maintain influence, control, really, in different settings. And its inspiration, you can see, it draws from some real historical heavyweights, figures like Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, even like ancient Roman emperors. So our mission today really is to unpack these laws. We'll look closely at what makes the book so compelling, but also where the big criticisms lie, so you, the listener, can kind of decide how you want to approach it.
Right. And given how controversial it is, what do you think is the core appeal? What draws such a, well, diverse crowd? You mentioned celebrities like Jay-Z, Will Smith, then business leaders, even prison inmates.
Yeah, it's a huge range.
Because this book, it sold over 1.2 million copies in the U.S. alone. It doesn't really waste time, does it? Right at the start, you get a real taste of its philosophy. Laws like never outshine the master, that's law 1, or the pretty blunt crush your enemy totally, which is law 15.
No messing around.
Yeah, they give you a really strong flavor of the book's, let's say, direct and often stark content.
Okay, yeah. So the appeal, I think a huge part of it, honestly, is how Greene makes these complex, sometimes, frankly, brutal ideas feel accessible. One of the book's acknowledged strengths is the storytelling. He uses these really vivid historical examples. He tells narratives about, say, Louis XIV or various con artists throughout history, and that brings the principles to life. It's almost like a playground for history buffs. You get these deep dives into how power actually played out across different times, different cultures. And that makes the lessons stick in a way that, like, a dry textbook just never could.
That's a great point. Not just dry facts, but stories. Vivid stories that make these power principles, well, real. And that narrative approach must be a big reason it resonates so widely. So that brings us to something interesting. Beyond the history, the book seems to offer practical guidance for navigating real-world power dynamics.
Yeah, that's the hook for many.
How do these sort of psychological laws translate into actionable strategies for someone maybe in a competitive business environment today? You see this with laws like conceal your intentions, that's law 3, or the very short one, always say less than necessary, law 4.
Right, and that's where the book's, let's call it cunning, really comes through. Greed isn't necessarily saying you should lie all the time. It's more about strategic ambiguity. So conceal your intentions, for instance.
Yeah.
It's less about outright lying, more about keeping your ultimate goal private. So competitors or adversaries, they can't easily predict your next move. You maintain that element of surprise.
Which can be crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In highly competitive fields, that can be a decisive edge. And similarly, always say less than necessary. That encourages you to project this aura of control, depth even, because the less you reveal, the theory goes, the more powerful and mysterious you seem. It's a very raw, kind of unvarnished look at human behavior.
Right. And this is where the book really starts to split opinions, isn't it? Greene takes what many describe as an amoral lens.
Amoral is a good word for it.
Yeah, I've seen it called amoral, cunning, ruthless, and instructive, all in one breath. And while that raw perspective, it can be valuable, maybe it helps you spot manipulative tactics in others or defend against them.
True, it can be a defensive tool.
But it also leads to some really uncomfortable territory.
Yeah.
Its cultural impact is huge, no doubt. It's become this mega cult classic you see in hip-hop, Hollywood, corporate life, but it's definitely not universally loved.
Absolutely not. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, like you said, the discomfort, many critics argue that these tactics, especially if you apply them without thinking, without nuance, they can foster really toxic relationships.
Yeah, I can see that.
They'd say the book lacks a solid ethical grounding, that it could actually, push people away from genuine, trusting connections. And it's not just the ethics either. There are also criticisms about historical inaccuracies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some historians point out that Greene sometimes oversimplifies or maybe even distorts historical events, especially things like Tudor history or ancient history.
Okay.
So while the stories are definitely vivid, engaging, some argue they put narrative impact ahead of strict historical fact, which for some readers, that can undermine the book's credibility.
Okay, so we've got the ethical concerns, potential historical issues. So this leads to a pretty crucial question for anyone thinking about reading this. How should you actually approach these laws? Because besides the moral and historical debates, there are also criticisms about the book's structure itself, right? It's long, over 400 pages. Some find it repetitive, like he reuses examples.
That's a common point, yeah.
And people even argue some laws contradict each other, like Law 48, assume formlessness. Sounds like a kind of catch-all that maybe washes out the specifics of others.
That's a fair critique. It does raise that important question. Is this really a universal playbook? Or is it something more nuanced? Because these laws, they're definitely not scientific principles, not universally applicable in every single situation.
Right.
They can actually backfire.
Yeah.
Especially in modern settings where increasingly you need emotional intelligence, collaboration.
Things Greene doesn't emphasize as much.
Exactly. So critics really stress this warning. Don't just apply these literally without understanding the social context, the nuance. Taking them too literally could really be counterproductive. They're observations, maybe patterns he saw, not unbreakable rules.
That distinction, observation versus scientific law, feels really important here. Okay, so knowing all this, who is this book actually for? And maybe just as vital, who is it not for?
Good question.
It seems like it could be ideal for someone really interested in power dynamics, strategy, maybe human psychology, especially if you work in a very competitive field.
I agree with that.
Its core value seems to be in understanding manipulation tactics, whether you plan to use them, maybe selectively, or perhaps more commonly, to just guard against them when you see them in others.
Precisely. It can be about recognition and defense. And on the flip side, who it's not for? Well, it's definitely not suited for readers looking for ethical, collaborative ways to lead, or just anyone who's fundamentally uncomfortable with amoral frameworks. That's key. If you're looking to build trust, foster genuine influence through positive means, there are alternatives, like Dale Carnegie's classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Ah, yes. A very different philosophy.
Completely different. So it really matters what you're looking for before you decide to dive into Greene's book.
Okay, so as we sort of wrap up our discussion on the 48 Laws of Power, it's really clear this book is, well, it's a fascinating but definitely challenging double-edged sword.
That's a good way to put it.
It's compelling because it just dissects power dynamics so unapologetically. But yeah, it can be pretty unsettling in how it seems to endorse ruthlessness.
It is, absolutely. And I think the ultimate advice, echoing our sources, is that it's best read critically.
Yeah.
Use it as a lens, maybe, to understand human nature and power dynamics, rather than as a literal instruction manual to just follow blindly.
Right. Critical engagement is key.
Yeah. And Greene himself, he's argued the book's about realism, not about being evil. He points out that only a handful of the laws are really overtly manipulative. Our main source actually gave it a 3.5 out of 5, called it compelling, thought-provoking, but also flawed. Flawed by its cynicism, its lack of maybe moral balance.
So worth reading for insight maybe, but not for blind adherence.
Exactly. Insight, not necessarily instruction.
So the 48 Laws of Power, undeniably impactful, definitely thought-provoking. But its real utility seems to lie in your own critical engagement with the ideas. It gives you a stark look at human nature, sure, but at the end of the day, it's up to you how you choose to integrate that understanding into your own life.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps. Considering this deep dive we've taken into, well, the raw mechanics of power, how might understanding these laws, both their appeal and their dangers, how might that change how you navigate your own interactions, how you observe the world around you, and maybe what responsibility comes with having that kind of knowledge?